President Xi and President Biden virtual summit, and U.S.-China relations. But of course, your latest book, Rivers of Irons, Railroads and the Chinese Power in Southeast Asia. And of course, also you can share your views on the future of Belt and Road Initiative, and also what has been proposed by G7, this Build Back Better World, B3W. So this is really a great dialogue that we hope that we can really have with David. But before we get into the details, I would like to introduce our distinguished guest today. Professor David Lampton is a famous China hand and has actually a distinguished career spanning nearly 5 decades in the study of Chinese politics and foreign policy and Sino-US relations. So currently, he's a senior research fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Study, SAS, at its Foreign Policy Institute, where he was also formerly the dean of the faculty of the SAS, and also George and Sino-US relations Heman professor and director of China Studies. He was most recently Augsburg Rohilland Fellow at Stanford University, Asia Pacific Research Center from 2019 to 2020. I know Professor Lampton for a long time. I remember very well, you invited me to SAS to give a talk around the year of 2010 when I was at Brookings, and also you visited CCG in the year.
You gave a talk there.
Yeah, give a talk there. Yes, that's right. So really a great memories you had with us. Not in addition to the academics, actually, Professor Lampton is a former chairman and now member of the board of the director of the Asia Foundation, and also former president and current board member of National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. So you have many academic and social titles, and you have been really played a significant role in maintaining and promoting understanding between U.S.-China. So really a great welcome to our dialogue. So perhaps before we get started, maybe you can give some the initial analysis and on the latest development of China-U.S. relations, particularly how you view this recent President Xi and President Biden virtual summit, and what's your general take of this current U.S.-China relation? Since you are such a great expert on the U.S.-China relations, perhaps you can also have a little opening remark, David. Yes.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, in a way, we're in the most unprecedented time in U.S.-China relations, perhaps since Nixon went to China in 1972. And the mere fact that our relationship right now is in an unprecedented situation, I think means there are no experts. This is a situation that we haven't confronted in a long time. And so, to borrow a phrase from Deng Xiaoping, I think both sides are feeling their way across the river by feeling the stones. So I think we are engaged in a kind of incremental, step-by-step attempt to understand how we can manage this relationship in a far different environment. And that environment is different from what we dealt with for the last 40 years in several respects. And one is that, of course, China has made enormous strides in its economic power and its capacity to shape the regional economic architecture and infrastructure. And of course, military power relationship has fundamentally changed. And so it's quite natural to say we are really confronting an unprecedented situation. I think President Xi, and I can't speak for President Biden for sure, but I think they would both agree that our principal need at the current time is to avoid what was called, I think President Xi said, catastrophic mistakes. So if we ask, is the big danger catastrophic mistakes, and then talk about the Xi-Biden virtual meeting of last week, I think that meeting somewhat gives me more confidence that there is a will to manage this relationship on both sides. So I think I'm a little more confident of our ability to manage things for the next period of time than I was. But I would want to emphasize that I think we have not fundamentally addressed the major issues, much less resolved them, that are creating the problems. If you think about it, for the last 40 years, our growing economic relationship was a positive factor in the relationship. Now economics is a very contentious part. And though we had an agreement between the United States and China under President Trump in 2020, quite frankly, that a trade and economic agreement was not lived up to. We still have tariffs that resulted after there had been hope with the new administration here in Washington, we might ease up on tariffs. So I would say no fundamental progress on the economic side. On the, let us say, military and security side, I thought the fact that they talked a little about, as I would understand, arms control, from an American point of view, I think, without speaking for our government, that when we now for the first time might be able to talk meaningfully about arms control, at least in a limited sense, I take that to be positive. And the sense I got from the virtual summit that our military to military may engage more seriously with each other in dialogue. If that happens, I think that's good. But fundamentally, we're in an arms race, and this virtual summit did not stop it. And it has quite a momentum in both our societies because a lot of budgets involved, perceptions of threat on both sides are involved, and technology has a logic of its own. So I would say the two big drivers of US-China relations, economics and strategic security issues, the virtual summit, as far as I can see, did not really address them. So just to summarize, I think it's better to talk than not to talk. I'm glad we're talking. I think that's certainly the first step to make progress. But frankly, I didn't see very much progress.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. I think you made quite unique analysis. Actually, you mentioned this dialogue is important, and also that that helps to create some atmosphere for further dialogues. I think that's certainly important. I noticed somehow, of course, that President Xi actually referred to President Biden as old friend, and so that they have a lot of exchanges, dialogues in the past. But one thing, as you said, also President Xi mentioned, we try to avoid catastrophe mistakes like that. But President Biden said something I think quite interesting to Chinese too, because he really said that he does not seek to change China, and does not seek a build up alliance against China, and also recognize the one China policy. And so that is in line with what he has actually said when he put out the troop from Afghanistan, that during the announcement, he said he's no longer seek nation building, for Afghanistan, or maybe to that matter of Iraq, Syria, or Libya, or Middle East. So there are some changes there. So what I'm thinking is that if that, if the US do not seek nation changing or or because one of the complaints we hear very often is that, oh, we have helped supported your joint WTO, supported your reform, but you didn't become one of us. You didn't converge. You didn't, become what more similar like us. So probably with that singling a change that U.S. now starting to recognize, China is what it is, and giving its 5,000 history and its logic development and all those aspects. Perhaps the two countries can really think about the framework, how they can peacefully live together. Like President Xi said, respect to each other, peacefully coexisting, and try to be win-win. So what do you think about that? Does President Trump sound a little, Biden sounds a little different than the previous? Whereas during the Trump era, everything, CBC is bad. 100 million party members cannot come to the United States, and this and that. So this probably sounds some shifting in terms of recognize the reality and how to think about we can work towards the future. What do you think about this framework that we're trying to reshape a bit?
Well, first of all, I agree with the words that you highlighted. Old friends, a friendly word, a set of words, concept. Certainly, I think there was some recognition that it's the attempt to change the internal values, operations of another political system are difficult. I think there was some recognition of that. But I think they're all, and also on Taiwan, I would say you're right, he reiterated the one China policy. But on the other hand, he's been reiterating the one China policy all along. At the same time, there have been some changes, you might say, in the implementation of that policy. And I don't think I heard him say that he was going to change implementation that much. Maybe I missed that. Mm-hmm. So I would say, yes, those are positive words, but I don't think they represent much change. And if you think about it, and it should be clear from what I've said, I certainly don't propose to speak for the US government or the Biden administration, but we have the Summit of Democracies coming up. That's a high priority for President Biden. And he's talked about the global situation as, in a sense, a struggle between autocracies and democracies. And usually he mentions that China is a principal concern in that regard. So I see a bit more ideological content to a Biden administration, certainly than the Obama administration that he was vice president in. Trump, frankly, was all over the lot, wasn't consistent, and I took a grain of salt on a lot of things he had to say. You're right that he tried to implement a policy of not permitting the 98 million members of the Communist Party to come to here. Frankly, I never understood how we would even know in many cases the status of individuals coming. So I didn't take terribly seriously a lot that President Trump had to say, but he was president and he did have levers of power, and occasionally he did do things that had a real impact. So, but long and the short of it is, I don't think any of the friendly statements I heard there fundamentally changed the relationship. I think it provided avenues to talk about the real problems. And I hope we will seize this opportunity. I think in a way it maybe, I don't want to quite say stabilized our relationship, but at least it made it less fragile, I think, and gives us a little time to operate. But the question is, what are we really going to do to change the calculations of the other side? And I did note that in the course of the virtual summit, there was talk about red lines on Taiwan. And certainly, even in the wake of the meeting between Xi and Biden virtually, tensions continue in the Taiwan Straits. And the movement of naval and other assets by both sides continues. So just for example, I don't see a big change in the security situation in the Taiwan Straits, certainly over the long run.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think that you're right. The tension in the Taiwan Strait is still there, even though the U.S. has repeatedly said they respect one China policy. But recent years, we see, even Trump sent his undersecretary to Taiwan, and we see several plane loads of congressmen visit Taiwan recent months, and President, the Taiwan authority leader said there was U.S. personnel, military personnel based in Taiwan. So all those, things that, and on top of that, we see a parade of warships, navies sail through the Taiwan Strait as well. So I think China has to respond, has to, react. But basically, I really think that, that probably we should really come back to the three communique and really come back to the this one China policy or principle, whatever, that has been agreed upon and not going to irritate the status quo. So I think if that is done, maybe we could have a, as you said, we can stabilize, maybe at least stop the downwards, spiral on the bilateral relations. But right. Also, I think you are right. Even though President Biden, he was said at the UN's General Assembly, say, okay, we are not seeking to build up two camps. We don't want to ask people to take sides and things like that. Yet they're having this the democracy summit, which I think it's kind of ironic to divide the world into democracy or non-democracy or autocracy, whatever. That's another way of setting up the camps, basically. And but these days, I mean, China also, they may not have this exactly same style of Western democracy, but they do have a, you're probably aware that this consultative democracy, they have a lot of consultation. For example, the 14th Five-Year Plan, they sought about over 1 million comments and suggestions. And also they have this whole process, which means, there's always experts, delegates, CPPCC members involved all year round to give government, recommendation, critics, and all kind of plan to compare. So that's probably, that's why I was thinking that President Biden side not going to change in China is maybe give some credit to this system, because if China is everything is a bad decision, how can China, leave 800 million people out of poverty or really build the, best probably infrastructure in the world? I mean, the KPI doesn't really substantiate that. So this kind of two camps on democracy or non-democracy, really, it's another way U.S. is still trying to do things like that, which I think a lot of Chinese people are really confused. So I think maybe you can, yeah.
The way I would frame the problem is that I think you used the phrase, will President Biden give credit for consultative democracy? And I think the short answer to that question in terms of what I would anticipate him to do would be no, he's not going to do that. And then you would ask yourself, well, why? And I think this gets to the fundamental dilemma of our relationship. And it's equally true in Beijing and China more broadly, and in Washington and the United States. And that is the political calendar in both of our countries does not make being reasonable, conciliatory, and flexible very easy to do for either leader. Of course, Xi Jinping just had the 6th plenum, and by my reading it from his point of view, and achieved what he wanted to achieve. But there is no reward in Chinese politics for being very flexible with the Americans. And if you look ahead to the 20th Party Congress coming up next year, it's going to be very difficult for, I would say, any Chinese leader, but I would think this is true with the current Chinese leadership, to be too flexible. In the documents of the Six-Party Plenum, and there was a lot of concern about subversion from the U.S. And its activities in Hong Kong and elsewhere. So I would say the level of suspicion in China of the U.S. has not been diminished, and the domestic political situation in China does not reward leaders for being flexible and accommodating to the United States. And by the same token, it's at least as true in the United States. Next year, we have congressional elections that will dictate, or the results of which will dictate who controls both houses of Congress. And of course, that's why Biden is so desperate or anxious to get his legislation passed now, because he can't be sure he'll have a Congress that will pass it after the elections next year. And frankly, he either has to use his capital to pass legislation on infrastructure and building more social equity in the US. He doesn't want to spend his capital saying nice things about China that are going to be criticized. And then, of course, when we're past the 22 elections for Congress, we're going to be then into a campaign for the next president. And leave it aside whether Mr. Trump will be a major force in US politics and maybe a candidate, and I think both of those things are possible. The spirit of populism and what you might call Trumpism is very strong here in the United States. So all I'm saying is the domestic political environment in both our countries does not encourage either leader to be seen as weak by their respective publics. So that it's this concatenation of domestic inflexibility, nationalism in both our countries, exaggeration, rumor, and then, of course, the power relationship and the economic relationship is changing. So it's just as one observer said long time ago, it's an enigma wrapped up in a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think your analysis really brought up this question about deglobalization, and nationalism, populism is running high probably in the United States and probably also in China. So that is really not good for the leaders to really have a deep dialogue and facing its own challenge. For example, you're right. Trump, President Biden is having this midterm election coming up of the Congress, and then on the Senate they are barely just have one more seat with the Vice President Harris there. So the dynamic can change. Also, they are losing a seat in the Virginia governor race recently to the Republicans. So that's exactly the dilemma we are facing. So I'm thinking of U.S.-China, of course, have its own path of development. China basically is living in the world of democracy. U.S. probably is the largest opposition party. You got to be watched by all the countries and things like that. But China also have a domestic. They have a market. I would refer that as a market democracy or technology democracy. 1 billion smartphone users actually can decide what they do on a daily basis, voting every day. So somehow, I think this internal energy and synergy will continue. But I'm just thinking, yeah.
I was just going to say, you've mentioned a couple of times technology, And I mentioned that I thought part of the problem we've got is a technological race. And part of that technology race is over economic dominance and control, or at least success within the future industries. I think just give one example, artificial intelligence. Now we have the capacity to delegate decisions within militaries to essentially machines. We have machines now with logarithms to determine what phrases will be selected for advertisements, for political advertisements, for propaganda. And the purpose of many of these mechanisms to select thought and exaggerate conflict. They exaggerate conflict within our own societies and between societies. So I think one of the new elements in our relationship is this technological race. It's partly for economic dominance, but technology has its own logic. And part of that logic seems to be to increase conflict. And also the delegation of military decisions to machines, I think, is a very dangerous trend that we have to be mindful of. So I think one of the new aspects here is technology. And how are we going to, as two countries, come together to cooperate to make sure that, so to speak, it's man running the machines and not the machines running man?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I think, that really, as I recall, it's really start from probably President Trump, that he's really, starting to really decouple and banning the use of companies like Huawei or ZTE, and then we see a host of companies being put on the list during the Trump administration. That kind of a decoupling in technology actually already happened somehow. And also that forced China to develop on its own now. So it's really not healthy. I think we use the technology to conquer, the universe and then everything, but not really into a arms race or military competition.
Well,
so that's not really great.
I'm not sure most Americans would agree with that, but the way I would put it is that because there is this decoupling going on, and in China, just like in the sense of the US, there's talk of self-reliance, because when you have security problems with a country, you want to depend on them for strategic items, whether it's food or machinery, high-tech machinery, or whatever. So that, but I think the United States sees China as increasing the state enterprise sector, because that's where some of your most advanced, but not all your most advanced firms are. And so I think the American storyline is China's increasing state control of key aspects of the economy, particularly in the security area. And therefore, the United States uses that as a justification to clamp down on exports of certain goods to China. It's working with Taiwan for a big investment in computer chips in the American Southwest. In other words, we're each responding by creating our own independent economic and technological subsystems. And when one side does it, the other side reacts. And so in a way, I don't find it very productive to say who started this. What I find it productive to say is we now are in a problem. So what are we jointly going to do to solve the problem?
Yes. Yeah, no, I think, David, you're right that, we do have a huge problem. I would probably interpret that somehow to the mistrust, and of course also to a misunderstanding to some extent. For example, in China, you know that SOE, China has always been a highly centralized country, thousands of years history, big irrigation project, across the geographically big country. So SOE or big gigantic project is always tackled by the state. And that really helps the, lift the 800 million people out of poverty, or having this big infrastructure project across the country, Three Gorges dams, or Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Macau, ocean bridges, those projects. So SOE play a unique role in China, but somehow is not really understood well outside China. But also, for example, the rural area. I mean, the Wi-Fi rate by the China Telecom and China Unicom has to be low so that they can really help in the villages. Yeah. So there's a lot of understanding. I think we haven't really got that.
Well, I think you're right in terms of China's history, in terms of its rice culture. You've always needed to have big water projects that had to be almost initiated by government or very large government entities. You have a different history, a different geography you have to deal with, a much bigger population. But in the same token that I think we should better, or at least Americans should better understand China's particular circumstances, I think China needs to recognize our particular circumstances. And our particular circumstances are small and medium business is the backbone of the American economy. And even our biggest corporations, for the most part, have little or no direct ownership by our government. And so when in our politics, the private sector or small business looks at China and they say, how can we compete with state-financed corporations that have centralized or more centralized decision-making? So while it's understandable where China's economic and organization came from and why you do it, on the other hand, it's just precisely the kind of economic management and philosophy that scares a private sector, small and medium business-sized country. So we're not going to solve this problem. But I think for the last 40 years in the process of trying to get into WTO, and I hope we, along with China in its application to the TPP, the new version of TPP, I hope maybe we can move towards both trying to join that and once again try to develop common, at least more common, economic practices that will reduce the tension. So my basic feeling is the last few years where we didn't join AIIB or we didn't join TPP or you set up RCEP, we're growing apart. And it seems to me we have to get back in trying to grow a little more together. And we've got to take account of your needs for centralization and scale, but you need to take into account our demand by our private sector.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I think you're right. We all have special circumstances. Of course, China has its characteristic and US has characteristic. How we can really, minimize that gap and understand each other better. I think that, a mechanism like a WTO, where I think multilateralism still really is the answer for that. I'm glad that you mentioned about RCEP and the CPTPP, and China joined one of them and trying to join the other one, and that all actually very, very important mechanism for minimize the differences and enhance understanding, because CPTPP is largely designed by the US and China is willing to join that. Ministry of Commerce has put the CPP agreement on the MOFCOM website. Here's the target to shoot for. Let's do it. So So that's probably is the way to find much common ground and talk to each other, and that's through those multilateral arrangements.
Of course, I agree with that, but it's not going to be easy. That CPTPP has relatively high standards, market style standards. And so it will take work for China to comply. And frankly, in the United States, there are forces in the Democratic Party, not to mention the Republican Party, that don't like international economic regimes that they think constrains the United States too much. So the point is, I think that's the desirable way to go. But once again, particularly in this case, in the United States, neither political party, at least for the last few years and now, seems very comfortable with the idea, even though Japan took the lead after the US pulled out of the TPP discussions.
Yeah, I think now even UK now wants to join CPTPP, and China actually last year Premier Li actually announced that at the National People's Congress, and President Xi actually announced that at APEC Summit. China is very interested to join that, and also Minister Wang Wentao of MOFCOM actually officially applied that just 2 months ago through New Zealand, where the document is deposited. What I think now is that actually, if you talk about 10 years ago when CPTPP just started, it was, maybe they think, China still follow up on the WTO, and the TPP is high standard. It's maybe not compatible to what China has been doing. But now, after 8-9 years later, China is actually catching up. For example, TPP is concerned about IPR. I mean, IPR, China has the largest patent applicants in the world now, and also TPP has a high environmental standard. And China, President Xi's Green Mountain, Blue Water is the Gold Mountain, and Gold Water is already deeply embedded into Chinese concept. And also you have these labor rights that has to be respected. And now China calls for common prosperity, exactly trying to raise the labor of the migrant workers in the cities. And also digital economy. Digital economy, China is now one of the largest digital economy. Digital economies already counts about 38 of China's GDP now. And of course, you mentioned about SOE, which is, I think, big worry overseas. But, why can't we really follow some competitive neutrality? Maybe in China, SOE is more needed, but when they perform outside, they could do a follow-up competitive neutrality, which is internationally recognized. So there could be ways to talk. If Vietnam
I agree with most of what you've said. I think an American would respond, or at least many Americans would respond, that they're reluctant to make new agreements with China on the economics when we didn't get satisfaction on the phase 1 trade deal. So one thing I was hoping might come out of the Xi-Biden talk was some movement forward that would allow American politicians to say, we negotiated with China, we didn't get everything we wanted, but when we did agree, China lived up to it. Now, of course, the COVID virus came along. Our bilateral relationship had many problems. So objectively speaking, you can understand why there have been problems. Yeah. But the average American realizes that there were agreements to purchase large amounts of US exports, and basically that has not happened. Of course, Chinese would say, you Americans threw tariffs on us, and not only on us, but even American allies. So in any case, I think we have to find a way to restore trust in previous agreements before there's too much appetite for new agreements. But I do, and you said one thing I thought was very, one of many things, very insightful, and that you said that actually European countries have expressed some, I'm not sure how much, but some interest in the TPP or CPTPP. PP. I would say the more Europeans that express interest, and the more interest China really expresses in getting in that organization, you'll find the Americans will not want to be left out.
Yeah,
so,
right.
so I think in some sense, let's try to repair as best we can past agreements, or at least live up to them going forward, and restore credibility to the idea of negotiation. And then I think if China and others move towards multilateralism, the CPTPP, you'll find the Americans will get more interested. That's my prediction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, I was at symposium webinar with virtual webinar yesterday with Kobo Foundation of Germany, and actually there were people suggesting EU should be in the CPTPP as well. So this kind of multilateral arrangement, it does help the world prosperity. Like China joined WTO. This year is about 20 years anniversary of China joined WTO. China's import from the world has gone up 6 times,
Right.
and the export has gone up 7 times.
Right.
So, but still, it's a relatively
right. But Europe's a complicated place, and generally speaking, the Germans are pretty forward-leaning on relations with China, particularly economic relations. And I would just say, as a piece of friendly advice, I think China needs to, once again, remember Chairman Mao had the 3 worlds theory.
Yes.
And essentially there was the Soviet world, there was the American world, and then there were the intermediate zones, the middle-sized powers. And I always thought it was a great strength of Chinese foreign policy to consolidate or to focus its energies on the middle powers, on the intermediate zones, so to speak. Now, we didn't like the way China focused on those, but the idea of keeping the middle powers at least friendly to China, I think is an important idea. And frankly, it seems to me China's relations with several very important middle powers could use some repair.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I think that because I think with the trade war, tariff war launched by Trump administration, that actually impacted many things. But also now Blinken and Biden comes up, they are seeking alliance of a kind of AUKUS or Quad, all coming up against China somehow. So I think you're right. I mean, we need to unite, or maybe have friendly relation with many countries as possible. I mean, that certainly is the way I think China should go. Absolutely. Now I'd like to talk something different. It's very interesting that I noticed that actually last time you come to CCG, I remember you were doing some exploratory, investigative, research and academic studies. We actually had the 2 professors talk to you. Now your book is coming out already. So you had the book of this River of Iron, Railroads and the Chinese Power in the Southeast Asia. You co-author with Selina Ho and Cheng-Chwee Kuik. So maybe, give us a bit of I know you are very, productive, had many books before, but this book particularly, the most recent book, give a bit of a highlight and what it's about.
Well, I think the first thing to say is the book is about how China itself built a high-speed rail industry. And to make a very complicated story short, in about the year 2000, China didn't have a high-speed rail industry or a high-speed rail system. So the first part of the book describes how did China build the technology and the infrastructure for a high-speed rail system, and it's quite a story. This is, if I was a Chinese trying to make the best case, I would say this is an example of how industrial policy and planning can work. Because you moved very rapidly to develop the technology and then lay down the infrastructure. I would think outside of a wartime circumstance, no major country besides China could do something so big so fast. Now, of course, when you do things big and fast, mistakes happen. So that happened in China. But basically, you developed very rapidly a what you might call technology forcing industry. In the United States, Boeing Aircraft not only built airplanes, it developed metallurgy, instrumentation, navigation, all of the things that surround these systems. So in building your high-speed rail system, you built a driver for many other parts, high-tech parts of your economy. So part of the first part of the story is how you built this industry. Now, once you had it, and particularly once you built your own system, you then had an industry that was an export industry, like Boeing is for the United States or Airbus for Europe. And so the second part of the story is how China tried to, and is trying, and as we were discussing before the show, soon, I believe this next month, your rail line from Kunming to Vientiane, the capital of Laos, will open up. So the first part of this export system to Southeast Asia will open up soon. The second part of the book, therefore, is about how China is negotiating with 7 Southeast Asian countries on the continent, not to include Indonesia, how you're negotiating to build a system that will connect possibly the 7 Southeast Asian countries on the continent to the south of China and hook into the domestic system of China. Now, in describing how you're doing this, I want to make I think it's a very important point that we make in the book. This idea of an interconnected Southeast Asia was not, with China, was not particularly a Chinese idea. This wasn't Hu Jintao's idea. This wasn't Jiang Zemin's idea. It wasn't Xi Jinping's idea. In this particular case, the Southeast Asians, going back to the colonial powers, the French, the British in Southeast Asia, wanted to connect by rail to China, to penetrate inland China. So, but what China did do is build the industry, then got the capital, and now it's helping Southeast Asia build out this plan. So this isn't a case of China forcing infrastructure plan on reluctant Southeast Asians. In fact, the Southeast Asians came to Premier Zhu in around 1995, as I recall, or maybe I think he was vice premier then, and asked whether China would help finance railroad development in Southeast Asia. And Zhu Rongji said, no, we don't have the money or the technology, not the time for us. Well, a few years later, China did have the money and the technology, and now has been pushing forward. So the bulk of the book deals with China in negotiation with the Southeast Asian countries to gradually, ibu, build this system. And ultimately, it'll go from Kunming, I believe, probably within 20 or so years, a little uncertain, but I believe there will be a system of connectivity of high-speed rails, and I think it'll probably eventually, in the next 20 or so years, reach Singapore, and if not Singapore, certainly Kuala Lumpur. So this book is that story. Now, I don't want to talk too long, just to say one other thing. I think this represents, some people ask, is this a strategy? Is this China's strategy to take over Southeast Asia? And I would say no. It's a strategy to make China central to what you might call the East and Southeast Asian economic system. And you're building connectivity, just like we knitted together our continent with a transcontinental railroad here. And so I think this effort, leave it aside, each specific project may be better or worse, but overall the concept is strong that China is going to get rich if its neighbors get rich. And if our neighbors are going to get rich, they need to be connected to us, to China, and they need to be connected to each other. And so I think this is building the infrastructure for economic modernization and integration in Asia. And this isn't a plot by China to take over the world or that region. It's a intelligent effort to create economic interactions that will be beneficial to everyone. Now, of course, there's going to be corruption and all of the things that go along with such a vast vision. But I think the United States, about a year or two in 2018, began to wake up to the power of this vision. And so now you see the US negotiating with the Australians and the Japanese, talking to the Koreans, the Europeans, about how we might cooperate to help build up infrastructure in Southeast Asia and elsewhere in the world. So I think, a little competition in this area would be okay. But the basic pattern is that the United States is waking up to the need for infrastructure in much of the world, not to mention ourselves. We've got our own infrastructure problem too.
Yeah. Thank you for the highlight of this great book. Actually, I remember how seriously you've done the study. I still remember you were here in 2015-16. We actually introduced the professor from Beijing Jiaotong University, who is specialized on high-speed railway, to talk to you. But
you're very grateful for your help. Yeah. And I would just say, we were talking about U.S.-China relations. Yeah. We should not let the problems that our two governments have obstruct academic and intellectual exchange. And I'm afraid that, frankly, both our governments are making it more difficult.
Yeah. One of the positive outcome of this President Xi and Biden summit is that the same day they announced they resumed the journalist visa and exchanges. So there's something positive going on. Last time when they talked in September, we had the release of Madame Mon. And this time, and the same day, we hear the news of journalist visa has been relaxed. So I hope there will be more positive news on the trade and many other fronts. Right. But coming back to this infrastructure project, you're absolutely right. Around year 2000, China really hasn't not much railway on the speed railway. I myself growing up in a railway parents' family. My father actually went to Africa to build the Tanzania-Zambia railway. So that was one first time how China trying to develop its international railway business.
Right.
But you see, that's incredible. Now China has 2/3 of the speed of the length of the speed railway for the world now. Correct. And the total length of China's speed railway is equal to the next 10 countries combined. Right. Whereas U.S. military budget is equal to the next 10 countries combined. So I think using this infrastructure as a connectivity is really great. And you're right. Now U.S. is wake up to that. And President Biden, during the same day he's talking to President Xi, he signed his 1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. Right. That talking to doing his on the same day when he meet President Xi. So I think now even the G7 or G20 summit, G7 summit, the U.S. and G7 country proposed B3W, Build Back Better World.
Right.
So how do you think, do we need, we talk about a lot of differences, a lot of disputes, and a lot of, different in values and things like that. But exactly the case like you studied, this connectivity, those infrastructure, not going to help your neighbors, but also going, help yourself. And if the world is really in that kind of mentality, let's help each other, let's build infrastructure for the next half a century. That would be probably the biggest pie for all countries to work on. And maybe we could even upgrade AIB to GIB, to Global Infrastructure Investment Bank. And maybe US and Japan should join that. And so what do you think about the prospect of let's have an infrastructure, a global alliance or global bank of somehow, and US China should work on that, and B3W and BRI should be combined in some fashion, maybe.
Well, I think this is my personal view. I think the US and others should say the world needs infrastructure. In many cases, we, the United States, or we, the Germans, or French, Italians, Canadians, have certain talents, and we should work together to build infrastructure. Now, I think in the case of Southeast Asia, it's close to China. China's the biggest trading partner for almost all Southeast Asian countries now. So I think it's natural that China will have a leading role in that set of infrastructure. But if we were talking about the Americas and knitting together even more Canada, US, and Mexico, I presume the United States would play a bigger role because it's closer to home. And of course, the Europeans will play a bigger role in the further integration of Europe. So my point is that I think China, the United States, the Europeans have, well, you might say their backyards or their economic natural communities. And therefore, you'll see more activity by China in Asia, more perhaps by the US in our own country initially, and then in our region, and the same in Europe. But I think also this gets back to the point I made. China, with the big role of its SOEs, particularly in this industry. I mean, frankly, Beijing can tell the railroad corporation what you want to happen, and they can finance it. In the US, the government can't tell the companies what to do. So it has to be attractive to them. So in the US, for instance, maybe we provide investment insurance. Maybe we provide certain benefits to encourage companies. But in the end, this difference between a publicly oriented economy versus a more centralized economy, I think it means that the US will probably not play as big a role as China in building infrastructure all over the world. That would just be my guess. But I think the US should try, and I think we ought to work with our friends. And in that sense, I mean China too, if the opportunity. But we certainly can work with the Koreans, South Koreans. We can work with the Canadians that are quite advanced in this area. The French, Italians, they all have something to contribute. So my guess is the US will be somewhat less involved in terms of the amount of money. It'll be more private oriented than a Chinese approach would be, but that on balance, we're going to do more of this in more places in the world. Because frankly, the same way China benefits from this integration and connectivity, if the US is going to achieve economies of scale, we need to benefit from closer connection to bigger markets. And so I think we're going in the same connectivity direction. And I don't think globalization is dead. You're not going to have to take the word globalization out of your center's name. It's a reality. So, I think the US is getting into the game.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for praise. I mean, globalization, of course, is not dead, and I'm sure the center will have globalization for a long time to come. What I say actually, I can see this infrastructure as the biggest common denominator for the whole world. I mean, for developed countries, and for countries like African, Latin American, Central Asia, ASEAN, and everywhere. So even in the United States and in Europe. So actually, according to the G20, there's a center, GIH. Actually, they have actually issued a global infrastructure prospect report, basically saying from 2016 to 2040, the global infrastructure investment needs will increase to 94 trillion US dollars. And every year will be 3.7 trillion US dollars. So it's so much in big demand actually. And also the World Bank actually has actually issued a one by one road economics, basically a report, and saying that one by one road construction will let the Belt and Road along the route countries increase their income from 1.2 to 3.4%, and global actual income will increase from 0.7 to 2.9%. So there will be common prosperity, not just for China but for the whole world. So what do you think about this BRI? I mean, China is doing railway in the Southeast Asia country. It's kind of a maritime Silk Road, if you're using the Chinese term. They are trying to help building this connectivity. But the BRI, I mean, this is a scheme that China has been launching for 8 years now. Just 2 years ago, right. Central government has a big meeting. Yeah. So what do you think of the prospect of BRI and how we can really work together? I mean, China doesn't want to work it by itself. It's the principle of that is jointly consulted, jointly build, and jointly benefit. So what's your take on this BRI stuff?
Of course, I would defer to you in particular and Chinese people in general, but it's my impression that BRI itself is evolving over time. That as China gets involved in more places around the world, more different kinds of infrastructure, some places China's operating are not very politically stable. Others are much more secure. China's learning lessons and also how to deal with different political systems, because it's very sensitive to build infrastructure in another political system because they're organized differently, and you face indigenous groups of various sorts that might not like what's happening. So I think China's learning, and on balance, I think China's becoming a little more cautious. And as China's growth slows, which I think generally speaking over time it will, China will, and other needs for China domestically are big. So looking at the discussion in China, I think Chinese are themselves asking, how much of our national talent and resource and technology should we devote to outside of China versus inside of China? And even inside of China, how much to domestic needs versus military needs? So what I try to tell Western observers, at least as my understanding, is China debates about all these issues, and you're feeling your way towards sounder policy and not becoming overly committed financially. And it's always been my understanding that one reason China wanted the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank was to have others besides China finance a lot of this infrastructure. And frankly, I thought that was a pretty good idea. And I think the United States made, I will say, strategic error under the Obama administration not to join this. And in fact, when China drew up the charter for the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank It was an American lawyer that helped the Chinese do it, right? So all I would say is, yes, I think China will become more involved over time, but it will be, I think, increasingly careful. It will want to spread the risk to other countries beyond itself, and that we'll see China more constrained by competing demands for budget. So, yes, it's going to go on. Yes, I think it will be, is and will continue to be very important. But it's still only going to be a small part of what the world needs.
Yeah, so that's why we are thinking, if this B3W and BRI can somehow work together, find a mechanism. I mean, B3W, as you said, China maybe already have investment, have some technology, infrastructure, capacity, and then B3W may be more on the legal and other aspect, local condition may be more familiar because U.S. and Western multinationals are really interested in BRI and wants to work together, and also that. We have, of course, this AIB, as you said, it's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Can we really set up a Belt and Road International Bank Alliance, like we should be led by, World Bank, AIB, ADB, FDB, Latin American development banks? Let's all the development banks work together for the infrastructure revolution and transformation for the next half century, so that we have a big pie to work on. And we don't have to do a lot of geopolitical competition.
These are the things I'd like to be talking about. But instead, we're talking about red lines, and we're talking about bad faith agreements and so forth. So we've got to get our dialogue to the point where we can start talking about red lines that are very important. But I should, in all realism, say, I think the security frictions between our two countries, right at the moment, they're growing. And as long as our security relationship is sort of more threat-oriented rather than opportunity-oriented, you're then going to find people, I think probably in China, but certainly in the US, say, how can we help China increase its connectivity to the rest of the world if we face a sort of a security threat? So I think the precondition to moving ahead on these good economic ideas is to get our security relationship under control. And frankly, it's not under control. I mean, it's not out of control yet, but it's certainly not under control.
Yeah, you're right. I think that the trust and mutual understanding we build up is very important. So this high level head of the state diplomacy, I mean, hopefully can stabilize the relation and even put the guardrails against those potential risks. That then we start those constructive dialogues. I mean, really, I hope that people in the commerce, in the treasury, in the economic. And probably the banks. I mean, AIB is already a good internationally acceptable model. 104 countries are member. All the Western members are in it, except US and Japan. So maybe we could, work on that. So what I think that your book, I mean, on this infrastructure in the iron, this iron rail in the Southeast Asia is really a case in point. That such a strong demand and needs for this infrastructure connectivity. So I really think that development banks and the US aid and China International Development Cooperation Agency and CEDA and many other international agencies should work together, also with the development banks. And let's, through the UN, maybe somehow we find a way to connect the world with a massive infrastructure gradual build up, so that we can avoid, this kind of hot, war. Actually, I mean, because if we kept a geopolitical tension, we may end up, destroy the world. So I think you're right. I mean, the efforts, your research in this aspect really bring the understanding of what China is doing in Southeast Asia, and to that matter, to the world, how we can really work together.
Well, I think in that regard, there are small steps we can take. And I think the first small step, it's actually going to be a pretty big step, is getting our people going back and forth, talking to each other again, in person, on a sustained basis. And so, I think one of our top priorities in U.S.-China relations ought to be how can we sooner rather than later restore our person-to-person contact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's very, very important, and we really need to restore the people-to-people exchanges. I think really it's great that U.S. has admitted over 100,000 Chinese students going back to the United States during this pandemic summer, and I hope that we will have U.S. students come to China as well, and to that matter, next year hopefully we can contain the situation, and we can really start some kind of a new, finding the optimal point where we can maintain the minimum cases, but maximizing the people-to-people exchanges. And we hope you can come back, and you're right. We have to see each other rather than just talking virtually, and that's very, very important. Mm-hmm.
Well, when I get the chance to come back to China, I hope we can talk in person.
Absolutely. So we almost come to the end of our dialogue. Really appreciate your stay up late, and but actually my staff talked to me that there was almost 250,000 people watching us online. So that's good to know. And but we also have some media question that has that they know that I'm dialoguing with you, and then they actually posed to me beforehand. So there's one question from China Daily. So what's your take on the BRI's contribution to the world, and how we can really work to that direction? So that's one question. And another question from Guan Cha, a medium based in Shanghai. So among the Trans-Asian Railway network outside China, the China-Laos Railway is to be very first to open. What do you think, this will bring demonstrating effect? So you probably covered some of that already. And then another question is that this year marks the 30th anniversary of establishment of China-ASEAN dialogue relation. Actually, yesterday, President Xi and ASEAN leaders just had a summit on that. And RCEP will come into effect on January 1st next year. So it will be cover 1/3 of global economy, and 90% of the goods. We achieved a zero tariff for that agreement. So on the other hand, the trade war is still going on, and with US and China and the tariff. So what do you think of the possibility of the tariff coming down between China and the US? And so this is basically what we have question. Actually, they also mentioned about China and ASEAN formally announced the establishment of a comprehensive strategic partnership between China and ASEAN. So, but also US is trying to do this Indo-Pacific, and so what do you think of this economic ties that is really a great direction to work for, rather than we are trying to form AUKUS or those quad security type of alliance? So it's a host of questions. Maybe you can give some answers.
Quite a few questions there, but let me just try to briefly address maybe three of them. One is that, as we mentioned, the Laos Vientiane to Kunming line should open up in December. And I think the question was, well, what kinds of effects will this have in Laos? And I would say in the region more broadly. First of all, the Laos link is really the first on the continent of Southeast Asia link that will have been completed. And of course, all the surrounding states, whether we're looking at Malaysia or particularly Thailand, which is next to Laos, Vietnam, all the countries around Laos are looking at how the project goes with Laos. And once it's completed, then I think that creates more incentives for others in Southeast Asia to join. So I would say the success of the Laos situation is very important, and all of the states will be looking at that results of that project, asking themselves now, does this make it more, does it make it preferable for us to join the system later or sooner or later? So I think the Laos, the completion is very important, not just to Laos, but the calculations of all the countries around it, particularly Thailand, because now Thailand knows there's going to be a connection to China through Laos. And Thailand, they want to run the railroad from the Thai border with Laos at Nung Khai down to Bangkok. So the next big question is what will the Thais do? Also, of course, the Vietnamese and the Burmese on the left and the right, so to speak, or the east and the west, are looking to see whether they want to join this system. So I would say the Laos is a big, let us say, advertisement for the system. Also, with respect to Laos, I think it's very important on a theoretical level. You might ask, where did the title for our book come from? Rivers of Iron. Well, actually, that was a phrase that was used in an interview by a Laotian planner who said, you know, the great countries of Europe and indeed China and many other countries developed their cities and their commerce by rivers. Now, it's true Laos sits next to the Mekong, but much of the Mekong not very navigable. So he said, we don't really have access to the sea. We're the only Southeast Asian country, no access to the sea. So he said, we need to build our iron rivers. We need to make up through infrastructure what nature did not provide us in terms of rivers and easy transportation. So I think the completion of the Laos, it's very important. It's much bigger a fact than the about 7 million people who live in Laos. Frankly, economically, Laos and the train will probably, I would guess, lose money. But in terms of its effects on the decisions of others and facilitating the development of this network over time, I think is very important. Now, one of your questioners asked about RCEP. All I would say is I'm not an expert on free trade areas, but I would note that the United States is really not, the member isn't pursuing free trade agreements very actively with anybody in Asia. And I think, I've always thought that free trade, or at least freer trade, is on balance if there are fair rules. Through comparative advantage, everybody's better off. So I'm very, I would say almost alarmed that the United States is allowing everybody else to build the free trade structure, and yet, we seem to not be pursuing free trade agreements very rigorously. You asked what were the prospects for the tariffs, and I can't speak for the US government. I have no special information, but I would certainly note they didn't seem to be very prominent in the discussion between our two presidents. Certainly publicly, nothing encouraging that I've heard has been said about tariffs. And frankly, going into elections in the United States and the importance of congressional support, I think right now there is very little support for tariff reduction here. Certainly some industries and economists would like tariff reductions, but I don't think that's the let us say, the prevailing sentiment in certainly the Democratic Party. So, I think we ought to move ahead on improving our own economic policy. I think we ought to negotiate with China to the phase one trade deal and reducing tariffs. But once again, the domestic environment's not very conducive to that at the moment.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. And we almost come to the end, and it's really a fascinating discussion. I think your book is really served as a very good case study of this connectivity of this maritime Silk Road, that actually by having Laos to start this first railway connecting China and Laos, and to that matter, as you said, as a demonstrating case to the other ASEAN countries, it will really change the future infrastructure landscape of ASEAN and the connectivity in Southeast Asia. So this is the right thing to do, and I'm really admiring you that through your deep discussion and research have come up with such a great book on this great subject. Also, I would like to also recommend you another book that we just recently edited. I edited with as the Michi. It's called Consensus or Conflict: China and Globalization in the 21st Century, which we talk about many issues we actually touched upon. And this book we had authors contribute like great subject Joseph Nye, also Pascalami, and Lord Jim O'Neill, Wendy Cutler, also other Edmund Phillips, Nobel laureates, and many others. So I'll send you a book on that, so we can keep the dialogue. And so once again, I think this is a fascinating discussion. We covered quite a number of issues. Talk about China-U.S. bilateral relation, the recent President Xi and President Biden summit. Particularly, we talk about your new book about this connectivity, the first project, River of the Eye, I mean, in Laos, and actually that is extended to ASEAN countries. And also to that matter, how we can, BRI and B3W and China and AIB, World Bank, everybody, how we can work together. And that is the dialogue discussion that we need, rather than we are talking all those geopolitical military alliance. So thank you so much, and appreciate your time and late in evenings. And we hope to see you again when you come to China.
Well, thank you, and happy holidays.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, David. We'll see you again. Okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Also, thank to our audience. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.